As you can see, winter is finally here in southern Idaho, but that's not going to keep me from going out and shooting. There's something that I've wanted to test for a little while now. My newest rifle build, if you guys follow the channel, I use the Eotech with the Magnifier with the Unity riser setup, and it's really nice, but it's really expensive. And so I wanted to find out, is it really that much better than a Sig Romeo 5 or the Juliet 3 Micro? Today we're going to find out. Welcome back to Sawtooth Tactical. Guns are one of those things where you generally get what you pay for. You know, you can get them at wildly different price points, and every piece of them kind of conforms to that standard. But can you get something that's just as good for a heck of a lot less? Both these platforms are perfect examples of that. Very expensive, very affordable. And they have similar optics setups, at least as far as what the functionality of them is meant to do. Eotech and a magnifier that flips out of the way, and a red dot and a magnifier that flips out of the way. But this red dot and magnifier together cost less than just this holographic or just this magnifier or even the mounts that they're on. So do you really get something that much better by paying $1,500 for this setup versus less than $400 for this optic setup? We're going to find out today. We're going to start with the Sig setup first. I've got two targets at two different distances to try with just the red dot and then with the magnifier. So when I first got into guns, I really was trying to get the most bang for my buck with every build, with every gun. And I made some mistakes in doing that, and I got some guns that really weren't all that good. And I've sold some of those. But this was my second AR that I ever got. It's a Palmetto State Armory, 11.5 inch. It was an AR pistol with a brace. It has since been SBR'd. But I did build it and set it up the way that I like. It's got a light. It's got a good optic setup, especially for the price. This is a Sig Romeo 5 red dot with the Juliet 3 magnifier with the flip to the side mount. And this gun works pretty well. More recently, I built this, and I spared no expense. If you guys followed the build series, I literally got every part exactly what I wanted, no matter what it costs. It cost me way too much money, but I absolutely love it. The thing is, I love this one too. So which one really is better? Now we're gonna go to the much more expensive setup and see if it really is that much better. This is the Eotech with the G33 magnifier on the Unity riser and the flip to center mount. Let's see how she does. Well, the short answer is that this one's better, but the longer answer is maybe a little bit more complicated, because if you're on a budget, something like this might serve you just fine. So the Romeo 5 is, in my opinion, the cheapest decent red dot that you can get. This one, actually I think it was this one, but that's another Romeo 5, was the very first optic that I ever got. It originally lived on this rifle before I put the LPVO on it. It still works perfectly to this day. I bought a second Romeo 5 when I got my second AR-15 because it had been serving me well. Now later on, when I wanted a little bit more capability, I got the Magnifier, and I felt like Romeo and Juliet, right? They're both made by Sig. I knew that they would line up right and co-witness correctly, and they do. And the Magnifier does give you a little bit more capability. This is a 3x magnifier. You could definitely reach out to longer distances with it. The flip to the side mount is a pretty standard setup for magnifiers. In fact, that's how Eotechs come as well. This is an aftermarket setup on this one as far as the mounts go. We'll get into that in a minute. But this red dot works just great. It's zeroed, it gets on target quickly, and it's like 130 bucks. The magnifier is like 200 and something bucks, and it comes with the mount. But the mount, you do have to push a button in order to move it either direction. That is something that you're going to have to deal with this kind of mount. Now, there are a lot of other ones on the market at varying price points, but this is what we have to compare today. Back to the budget Sig setup, and this really is, the whole thing is budget. This is a PSA 11.5 inch. I did SBR it, but I spray painted it myself, and it's even got the ambi bolt release we have at home. Let's see how it goes. Now the Eotech setup. Eotech is a vibe. It looks better. It really does. I mean, these are used by the military, and they are pretty much bomb-proof. They are holographic, so they're not technically a red dot, but for all intents and purposes, they do basically the same thing. Now the Eotech has a different type of reticle. See if we can get it on camera, but it's actually a circle dot reticle. God, this is always so difficult. There we go, you can see it. And I really, really like that reticle. It makes for very fast target acquisition, and it's a big window, and it's very clear because they don't need a notch filter on it for the reticle to bounce off of at your eye like a red dot does. It's just different technology, and so they're able to have a perfectly clear window. And then you have the Eotech magnifier, and I've kind of found that a magnifier is a magnifier, but I do like this magnifier, and I can set it farther back like this so that I get the correct eye relief with my stock exactly where I like it. And that is really nice because on this one, I could do that, but I would have to move my backup iron sight out of the way. And I just decided not to use a backup iron sight on this gun because it doesn't fit underneath it, which is something that you're going to have to think about with the Unity setup. Now, the Unity mounts. These things are not cheap. 260 bucks just for this magnifier mount. Another 100 bucks for the riser that the actual holographic is on. So this kind of setup is not going to be cheap. But is it that much better than the other one? Well, I do have to say, it is really nice not to have something hanging off the side of your gun when you're not using it. Your center of gravity is still in the same place, and it just tucks out of the way. But again, can't use a rear iron sight with it. The other thing about it that I really love, no button. It just has a detent, push it up, push it down, very quick, very easy to use. Yeah, more high-end setup here. Instead of the bad lever on this one, it's an actual ambi lower. This is the ADM UIC lower receiver. And one thing I can tell you already, it's nice with this mount to not have to use a button to, put it into place or not. Just an observation. I have found that I like the sight picture better on the Eotech, both with just the XPS itself and with the magnifier. And in fact, the magnifier actually makes the reticle more crisp and clear, which is very nice. And as soon as you flip it up, it just looks good through it, I have to admit. Now this, it looks decent, but it's not as good. That I have to admit as well. You know, there is something to be said for, you know, that you do kind of get what you pay for. But is this bad? I don't think it really is at all. And I do have to run my stock in a little farther with this because of where my rear iron sight is. But if I wanted to mount this farther back, just like the other one, I could. Magnifiers in general don't have great eye relief. And that is true of both of these. But I do think that the Eotech G33 has a little bit better eye relief. It is a little bit more clear. And I do love the bigger window of the XPS itself. And it also just looks cooler. And there is something to be said for looking cool. There are some advantages, though, to having this setup. For one, you're going to save money. Money that could be spent on ammo or training. Also, you actually, with this red dot setup, you do have Shake Awake. Now, Shake Awake is a nice thing. It extends your battery life. But in general, a red dot has a long battery life anyway. This has 50,000 hours stated by Sig Sauer of battery life. Eotech does not, and it's probably its #1 drawback. You do have to remember to turn this thing off, or it's going to drain your battery. And while I do usually remember to do that with this, with my LPVO here, I always forget to turn the brightness off, and so my battery's always dying. I haven't had that problem with the Eotech yet, but I have to remind myself to turn it off after every time I go to the range. And I'll have to remind myself too after filming this video. Now, do I think that it is worth spending the extra money on something like this versus something like this? I think if you have the extra money to spend, then yeah, you're gonna get way more credibility on Facebook and Instagram and the gun groups. This is truly a mid-tier setup. Really, it's kind of high-end for a holographic magnifier setup. This is very nice. And I do love how high up it sits. It just comes up into your field of view very quickly and easily. You could shoot with your head more straight up instead of having to get so close down onto the stock of your gun. And I find that to be really nice. And if you're running nods, that's even better. I don't have nods, so I can't really tell you a whole lot about that. But I do like how high up it sits. And I love that it flips down to the center and just comes right up instead of hanging off the side of your gun. I also love that you don't have to use a button like you do on this one. That takes a little bit more time, and if you see right there, and if you're not thinking about it, you might forget about the button, not push it in all the way, whatever. I do think that that button, not a great part of the design of this mount, and this doesn't feel as solid as the Unity mount. That's for sure. Now you can get different mounts, all that. Do I think that if you don't want to spend the money on the Eotech Unity setup that you'll be well served with something like this? I do. And so I think that there's advantages to both, and it kind of just depends on what you're willing to spend and how much you care if your gun looks cool and what your purpose for using it is. If it's just going to be a range plinker, don't worry about something like this. It should probably work just fine for you. But you are going to have a little bit more pride and ownership of something like this. And when you start reaching out to more distance, I found this to be easier. Even though they both have 3x magnification, this just seems to be easier at greater distances. I've been able to hit out past 100 yards with the 3x, no problem. And I'm sure I could go a lot farther. Unfortunately, it has started, winter has come here. We're getting a lot of snow, and my long range capability as far as where I go shoot is kind of going away until the springtime. As I've gotten more and more into firearms, I've learned not to cheap out on things. But I also have learned that there are some things that are a pretty good value. And the Sig combo here, the Romeo 5 and the Juliet 3, is a pretty good value for your money. Now, will you notice an improvement with an Eotech Unity setup like this? You absolutely will. But for about 4 times the cost, is it really worth it? Only if you're really going to go do a lot of shooting, I think. And if you really want something that will be pretty much bomb-proof if shit hits the fan. So take that with a grain of salt. If you don't want to spend this kind of money, I think you'll be served just fine with the Sig setup. But if you shoot all the time, I think that you're going to like something like this a heck of a lot more. I sure do. From Sawtooth Tactical, make sure you're subscribed. Please leave me a comment and tell me what you think. If you think a higher cost setup like this is really worth it. If you've tried both of them, you know, you do get what you pay for with firearms in a big way. And I don't believe in cheaping out, like getting a UTG or an NC Star or something. But if you do want to get, you know, cheaper optics, Sig makes pretty good ones for the price. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And from Sawtooth Tactical, stay strapped or get clapped.